Well, good evening and welcome to New Life United Pentecostal Church live stream broadcast. We are so happy that you joined us today, and we want to encourage you to bring your family around the TV or the monitor, whatever you're watching this on, and bring your Bibles with you as we open up the Word of God. I feel like it's very important for you to not just to see what we're teaching here on the screen, but also to read it for yourself in your Bible. You might have a pen and paper to take notes. That way you can look up scriptures later as well. But we're going to jump right in tonight, and we're going to continue in our series entitled Uncovered. And we're in lesson 4, and we're going to be talking about the fathers of the faith. We're going to talk about Old Testament examples of faith, and we're going to talk about patriarchs of faith, such as Noah, Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. If we look at the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 6, the Bible tells us that without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them who diligently seek him. And then we have a definition of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. It tells us, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Throughout the Bible, we have many examples of patriarchs of faith, and we have men and women both of faith, actually. And we can see how they live their lives. And that's why it's so important for us to read the Bible as a whole. I know that there are many that try to exist simply in the New Testament, and they don't read into the Old Testament, but the Old Testament is given to us for an example. And when we see these men and women of faith, we can gain encouragement and faith in our personal lives. And while there's nobody out building an ark or anything of that nature at this time, I will tell you this: there are men and women who give up their livelihood, men and women who sell their homes, and they leave their families behind and go to foreign countries to become missionaries for the gospel. Why? Because they felt led by God to go into a foreign country and to bring the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ to that country. We have many examples in the Bible of faith. Let's take a look at Hebrews chapter 11 and verses 7 and 8. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household. Verse 8, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. And tonight I want to ask you, how many of you, if you felt an urging in your heart from God to just move out and go to a completely foreign land, if you will, or go to a completely new place where you didn't know anybody, or you didn't have any connections there. My wife and I, we came to Hastings, Nebraska 10 years ago, coming up in July, and we didn't know anybody. In fact, neither of us had ever even been to Nebraska before we were elected pastor here. And I can tell you that it is a big step of faith, because you're coming into a community where nobody knows you. And so you have to build and establish relationships from the ground up. What many people enjoy, a lifetime of friendships and fellowships and things of that nature with their neighbors. We have to try to establish that from the ground up in a shorter period of time. But we stepped out on faith, understanding that God desired for us to be here for this place and this time. And so, as believers in the New Testament church, we are to follow the examples of the patriarchs of the Old Testament, and we are to live our lives by faith. And so, as we look at the lives of some of these Old Testament patriarchs, let's keep in mind two very important points about faith. The first is that faith always brings about action. James chapter 2 verse 26 tells us, "For the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." But the second point is faith guides us to salvation. Ephesians chapter 2 verse 8 tells us, "For by grace you have been saved." How? Through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's nothing that we could have done in and of ourselves. We are not good enough to have saved ourselves, but rather it is the gift of God. And so let's begin our study of the patriarchs, and let's take a look at Noah. In Genesis chapter 6, we learn about a man who was spared from a worldwide flood that was forced upon the earth, and this man's name was Noah. According to Genesis 6 and 9, Noah was a just man who walked with God during a time of great wickedness upon the face of the earth. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 6. We're going to begin at verse 5, and we're going to read through to verse 22. "Then the Lord saw the great wickedness of man. He saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. And Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. And you shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing on the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. Thus Noah did, according to all that God commanded him, so he did. Now, after God gives Noah instructions on how to build the ark and how to be saved from the flood, Noah demonstrates his faith by obeying what God told him to do. We don't know precisely how long it took Noah to build the ark. Scholars believe it took 100 years, but we do know that there was plenty of time for the others to be warned of the coming flood. However, even with this time of warning, Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives were the only humans saved. Now, what the significance of this to me is, I've had many people within the time of my ministry that have said to me, Pastor, we serve a loving God, and a loving God surely won't bring judgment. A loving God surely will save everybody regardless of how they act and how they are. Well, I read in the Bible how God destroyed the entire earth and everything that was on it because He is a just God. And He is a God of judgment just as much as He is a God of mercy and love. And so we are preaching the gospel. We teach the gospel message in hopes that you will receive it, and not just receive it, but will react and respond to it. Once again, faith causes reaction. And so we respond to the gospel message that is preached. We preach repentance. We preach baptism in Jesus' name. We preach receiving of the Holy Ghost with the evidence of speaking in other tongues as the evidence of the infilling. All of that can be found in the book of Acts. And so shortly after Noah and his family entered the ark, God shut the door of the ark and began to flood the earth, and rain poured down continuously for 40 days and 40 nights. Noah and his family were saved because of their faith and obedience to God. Although the story of Noah is an ancient one, and I can tell you that every tribe, every nation, every land has a story of Noah and the flood, including the Native Americans and the Asian and all, from all over the world. They go back to Noah and the flood, but we want to take a look at some of the parallels of the pattern of salvation in Noah's story with the pattern of salvation for today. First of all, we have to acknowledge and understand that there is sin. And we turn to Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great. Well, we know also Romans 3:23 tells us, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Sin brings death. Genesis chapter 6, verse 7. But Noah found grace. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on a second. Genesis. Okay, I missed a scripture. So bear with me. Genesis 6 and 7 tells us, so the Lord said, I will destroy man. Romans 6 and 23 tells us the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Genesis chapter 8 tells us about His grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Romans 5 and 8 tells us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Grace brings a plan of salvation. Genesis chapter 6 and verse 14 tells us, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. This is how you shall make it. God gave Noah a plan, and it was through faith that Noah executed that plan. Well, God also gave the church a plan. Acts 2:38. Man, I must have missed a bunch in here. So again, Acts 2:38. Repent and let every one of you be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. The plan must be obeyed. That's where faith comes in. Genesis 26 and 22. Thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him. Hebrews 5 and 9. And having been perfected, talking about Jesus here, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who, what? Obey him. We obey him through faith. Obedience allows God to save us. Genesis chapter 7, verse 16. So those that entered, male and female, of all flesh, went in as God commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The Lord prepared a way for them to be saved. 2 Timothy 1 and 9. The same God who has saved us and called us, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace. Another patriarch that is probably one of my favorites is Abraham. Abraham was a man that, again, I alluded to it earlier, he took up everything that he owned. He sold everything that he had, and he moved his family to a land that he did not have a clue where he was going. He moved until God told him, okay, this is the place I have promised you. And so we're going to talk about Abraham for just a few moments here. So many generations after Noah and the flood, the earth was once again well populated. And just as in Noah's time, finding faithful men and women was no easy task. However, in the midst of all the world's activity, God found a man who was willing to follow him and to live by faith. And although Abraham was 75 years old when God spoke to him and called him to a life of faith, age did not stop him. Genesis chapter 12 and beginning verse 1 says, Now the Lord said to Abram, Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you, and in the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. That's his nephew, went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Upon God's calling him, Abraham allowed God to lead him into a new direction. Imagine 75 years old and uprooting your family and leaving everything that you knew to be safe. That takes faith. And God led him to a new homeland, to a promised land. Abraham had no idea where he was going. But he trusted God, and he trusted that God was going to take him and lead him to a place. And God gave him favor for his obedience. And as Abraham journeyed on his life of faith, God often reminded him of the blessings that would come as a result of his trust in God. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 15. Then he brought him outside and said, Look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you're able to number them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. After following God for many years, Abraham was faced with the most trying moment of his life. Abraham had a son named Isaac, whom he loved very much. And to make sure that Abraham still trusted and believed God, God told Abraham to take his son up to the mountain and to sacrifice his son back to him. Wow. Abraham was an old man when God gave him his son. Abraham and Sarah never believed that they would ever have children. But in their old age, God blessed them, and he did according to his word. And now God was testing Abraham to see if Abraham would still trust in him. And so Abraham and his son Isaac went and they gathered wood and they started up the side of the mountain. And I cannot imagine what you would tell your son to get him to gather wood that he was going to eventually lay you on and ultimately would be willing to sacrifice you on. But Abraham was willing to do whatever God asked him to do, no matter what it was. And so we see in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 12. Here we go. In 22 verse 12 he says, "Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God." This event obviously takes faithfulness to a whole new level and places Abraham at the very top. When you're talking about the father of faith, Abraham has to be the very first name off your lips. Abraham is the father of the faithful. Isaac, Abraham's son that eventually would grow up and get married, and he and his wife Rebekah would have twin sons named Esau and Jacob. Now, although Jacob and Esau were twins, they possessed completely different perspectives and personalities. Esau was more a man of the land, a hunter and a gatherer, and Jacob was more of, don't know how else to put it, but a mama's boy. He stayed close to his mama's side, and he was not the hunter-gatherer. He was more soft, if you will. But at one point, when Esau had gone out and he had been out hunting and gathering and doing what he normally did, he had gotten so hungry and he felt as though he was starving. And Jacob was back and he had food cooked. And Esau told him, "If you will give me a bowl of stew, I will trade you my birthright for a bowl of stew." When you're starving, you'll trade anything for food. And yet here Esau, who was by birth the oldest, should have had the birthright, should have had the blessing of God, but he traded that because he was physically hungry. Now, Jacob would eventually also talk his father into praying Esau's birthright blessing upon himself. That's at a point where his father Isaac was about to die, and Isaac was basically blind, and again Esau was out hunting, and he was going to fix his father a meal, but instead his wife prepared a meal and gave it to Jacob to give to his father, and he deceived his father. He put on him goat skin so he would feel and likely smell like his brother, and Isaac ended up blessing Jacob. Now, here's the thing. I don't think that Jacob did all the things right, if you will. The very name Jacob means heel grabber or deceiver, or one who deceives or supplanter, or one who cheats. He began to mature, and after his father gave him his blessing, gave him Esau's blessing really, Esau said he's going to kill him. You can imagine. Because once Isaac blessed Jacob, he could not give it to Esau. And so Esau was furious. And so Jacob had to flee. He had to depend upon God at this point because he was out, on his own now. But Jacob was willing to risk death to get the blessing of God. Jacob was willing to do whatever, and here's my big takeaway with him. He was willing to do whatever he had to do to achieve God's blessing. And I think as the church, we sometimes get soft. Sometimes we don't realize that we do just enough to get by, rather than having a time of desperation in our spirit and saying, I will do, God, whatever I have to do for you to bless me. Because, church, there is no greater place to be than to exist right in the middle of the will of God. To be right where his blessings are. And so Jacob, as he aged, he began to mature, and he learned multiple lessons about the harm that his deception causes, and he eventually wrestled with the Lord. And when daytime was about to break, he was still wrestling with the Lord, and the angel of the Lord said to release me because daytime breaks, and he said, I'm not going to release you until you bless me. Again, wrestled all night for what? For a blessing. And it was at that time that his name would be changed from Jacob, or meaning, again, supplanter or one who cheats, to Israel, meaning triumphant with God. God changed Jacob's name to Israel because Jacob was willing to do whatever it took. Now, Israel would end up having a total of 12 sons, and their offspring would become known as the 12 tribes of Israel. And one of Israel's sons was a young man whose name was Joseph. Now, Joseph was one of the younger sons and was also spoiled by his father. And at a time where in history where colored fabrics were rare and expensive, Jacob, or Israel, he made a special coat for his son that was made out of many colors. And he gave it to his son because his son was favored by his father. And God was preparing Joseph to lead. And Joseph had been given visions by God. And so when we think about Joseph's journey in how he continued to remain faithful to God even during trying times, God's blessing and favor remained upon Joseph regardless of circumstance because of his father's faithfulness to God. Now, part of Joseph's success had to do with his ability to see God working through his ups and downs. After a long roller coaster ride of highs and lows, Joseph kept a positive outlook on all that had taken place in his life. He was a man of faith, and his faith brought about blessings of God upon his life. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 39. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Drop down to verse 21. Says this, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor. Drop down to verse 23. The Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. But I will tell you, Joseph's journey of up and downs began at the age of 17. At the age of 17, Joseph received a prophetic dream about his future. In the dream, Joseph sees his family members bowing down to him, and he tells his family about his dream. So that's one of the ups in his life. Now, if you go to the valley, go to the down. His brothers, they lash out in a jealous rage, throwing Joseph into a pit and then eventually selling him into slavery, and later telling Israel that his son, his favored son, Joseph, is dead. Back on an up, God blesses Joseph even in slavery, and Joseph becomes an overseer in the house of a high-ranking Egyptian military leader named Potiphar. But, of course, he's got to have another down in his life. Potiphar's wife tries to force Joseph to be intimate with her. But because of his loyalty to Potiphar and to God, Joseph refuses. And this causes Potiphar's wife to falsely accuse Joseph of attempted rape, and Joseph is then thrown into an Egyptian prison. Then we're back on an upswing. God continues to show him favor. due to his faithfulness, even while incarcerated. Joseph becomes an overseer over prison inmates. And farther up the line, Joseph interprets the dreams of two former employees of Pharaoh. When one of them is released, he eventually tells Pharaoh about Joseph's ability to interpret dreams. Pharaoh calls Joseph out of prison to interpret a dream that's been bothering him. And Joseph informs Pharaoh that the dream is prophesying an upcoming famine that will hit Egypt. And further up, Pharaoh appoints Joseph as the top leader over all food distribution in Egypt in order to prepare him for the famine. And Joseph begins to store a percentage of the food for Egypt to survive the famine. And when the famine hits Egypt and the surrounding areas, all the people are forced to come to Egypt to get food from Joseph. And this includes Joseph's brothers who bowed down to him in honor. The very vision that he had at the age of 17 years old came to pass when his brothers bowed down, not realizing it was Joseph that they were bowing down to. And though he was betrayed by many through his life, Joseph refused to hold grudges. Joseph refused to hate his brothers. In fact, he had his brothers go back and get his younger brother and his father and his family and brought them to Egypt to live in a place at that time of prosperity. Joseph refused to allow petty indifferences and things that were meant to be evil towards him. He refused to allow them to take control in his life, but rather he chose to have faith and to trust in God. And so he was a man who believed that God was always in control, no matter what station he was at in his life. He understood that God was in control. Take a look at Joseph's perspective and how it illustrates a biblical truth given to us today. And in your time of reading, I want you to go through and read Genesis chapter 50 and again Romans 8 and 28 and understand that God is in control. Everything that we do, everything that we are, no matter what station we are in life, we have to understand that God has everything in control. While the world may be going haywire around us, God is still in control. And it is incumbent upon us, just like it was on the patriarchs that we talked about tonight. It is incumbent upon us to have faith and to trust in God, no matter the situation, no matter the circumstance, no matter what's going on around us. No matter the family problems, no matter if you're dealing with incarcerations or no matter what's going on, understand that God has it all under control. Trust in God, have faith in God, and He will always be loyal and faithful to you. Amen. God bless you tonight. I want to thank you for tuning in. And we encourage you to share this video with your friends, with family, with your loved ones. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, we encourage you to subscribe by clicking the little button that's down here somewhere. And we want to ask you, if you like the video, to hit that thumbs up. And we certainly do appreciate that. Until we're together again on Sunday morning, I want to say God bless you. Go with God, and may He go with you, is our prayer.